called, of all the things, Rupert Lamb, which must be the most ghastly name to go through life with, who was an extremely good meteorologist and meteorological historian. And he referred to the study of historical meteorology as church steeple meteorology. In other words, the way you forecast the weather was to look from a high point like a church steeple. They got so good at it that they predicted it within 24 to 48 hours. And at one stage in my life, I was deeply involved with a lot of people who sail, who had no engines or anything. And these people were the same. They would look at the clouds and they would tell you the weather, and they were right. But this is very different from what we do, which is look at ancient climate. And in the last 30 years, there has been a magnificent revolution, and revolution is an understatement, in our study of ancient climate change. This has not only involved the advances and retreats in glaciers, but it's involved the study of fossil pollens, like the one here, which can be identified microscopically. This was first done by a Swedish scientist in the 1920s, but now it is highly refined to the point that they even identify cultivation weeds on prehistoric fields. And ice cores and tree rings, which are other major advances have been, apart from deep sea cores. And the technology is such now that with tree rings in the American Southwest, they have a record that goes back 3,000 years down to the season, which is amazing because they can really focus on short-term climate change. The same is true in Europe, where it's becoming increasingly refined and where tree rings go back to at least 6,000 to 8,000 BC. So now, for the first time, we've kind of got this album of climate change opening up, and the result is that our understanding of ancient societies and their adaptations to climate change, short and long term, is very dramatic. And the classic way of explaining this is to talk about a Stradivarius violin. Have any of you heard a Stradivarius play? You have. Isn't it heaven on earth? Good. She agrees. There was, or there is, a very famous Stradivarius violin. All the violins, and they're worth millions of dollars, or euros, have names. And this one was called the Messiah. But for years and years, for over a century, it was considered to be a forgery. It was suspect. And then about 15 years ago, some English tree ring experts persuaded people to let them take samples from the wood inside the violin where they could identify the rings. And they did this with the Messiah and with another violin that was about the same age, somewhere around 1730. This may seem incredible, but not only did they show that the two violins were indeed made of wood of that age, but they were made from the same log. So, dendrochronology, as they call it, has become very precise. So when people talk about us understanding ancient climate change, we really, really have a great deal of data now. And enough data to say that anyone who suggests that climate change today is not caused by humans needs brain surgery. But with this new emphasis on the study of climate change, which has been going for a while now, inevitably archaeologists have picked up on this. But about 100 years ago, there was an American geographer who put out theories that agriculture was caused by climate change, civilization was caused by climate change, the collapse of civilization was caused by climate change. And inevitably, there have been people who said, aha, we're looking at climate change now. People are becoming what they call climatic determinists and saying climate caused civilization. But I want you to think about this in another way. Think of a pebble and an absolutely smooth pond. And you take the pebble and you throw it into the pond. There is a plop. And then the rings radiate out from it and gradually become absolutely quiet again. What the impact of climate change is, whether it's short or long, are not so much the immediate thing, although obviously you may get flooding or drought. It is the economic, social, political and other consequences of it which really are the thing which change history, because it's the way we adapt to climate change that's important. And we've got people who are saying, oh, no use looking at climate change globally, it changes all the time. Of course it does. And what I'm going to look at are examples of specific cases where this has been done. I think this is far more important than bloviating about ancient Egyptian civilization. But to make the point as to how important this is, I want to take you to the middle Zambezi Valley in Central Africa. You can see it there in the square. That's Zambia. This is a low-lying valley at about 2,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by high mountains, escarpments, which are 4,000 feet. A cold day here is at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. This is brutally hot, and in the rainy season, which is from October through April, it is humid. And if ever you excavated a site in 105 degrees humid heat, you do something else afterwards. I don't recommend it. I spent a year in this valley, and I spent the time in close juxtaposition to these people who live in what is actually a spectacularly beautiful environment, where still today there is game. And when you've slept in the open air, in your camp, by the side of the Zambezi, and you hear lions roaring at the full moon, you have lived. This was very remote, very tough, very interesting. On one occasion we had elephants walk through our camp at 4 in the morning. You just say to them, morning, how are you? And they just go on their way, they're going to drink. If you're not aggressive, they'll leave you alone, they know you're there. Another occasion we camped on a nest of black marmots who will kill you in 20 seconds with their poison. So it was an interesting place to work. But the most remarkable things were the people. The Wembe Tonga. They're subsistence farmers, and I stress the word subsistence. They live from one harvest to the next. And although they live by the Zambezi, the river is at this level and they live at this level, and they don't have a pumping technology. So they depend almost entirely, or did when I was there, on rainfall, on seasonal rainfall, which makes the hottest months of the year, August, September, early October, the most critical months of the year. Because by about September, you get clouds beginning to form on the horizon. And, hello, what am I doing wrong? We have a fit of the vapors. Ah, I've got to go. And this is the time when the people go out in their gardens and they fire the vegetation. And then they spread the ash and work it into the soil with hoes. And they wait. I think the battery has gone on this thing. I can do it here. Okay. Yep. Thank you. And every afternoon, while they're burning, showers develop on the mountains in the distance. Temperature, 105, 107. It's so hot if you move a finger you sweat. Tempers are short. Cattle stand in the shade. It is brutal. And then, one magical day, it rains. It rains in one village for 5 minutes. It rains in another village 5 miles away for a whole day. In some villages, it doesn't rain at all. But When the rain falls, the people plant. Who tells them to plant? The shamans who intercede with the ancestors. And they plant. And then they wait, and they wait, and they wait. Sometimes it rains prolifically, and the maize in the millet grows green in the fields. But while I was there, the year I was there was no rain. There was hunger by Christmas, and famine by April. And the people suffered. Having, when I was young in those days, experienced malnourished children, you never forget it. And, what is more, you realize just how fragile life is, even today, for millions of people. So the impact of climate change on people like this is far more severe than it is on, say, ancient Egyptian civilization. We forget how many people, even today and in history, lived at the subsistence level. This is a famous painting, a oil painting, of peasants enjoying food during the harvest. It's an idyllic scene in the Low Countries. The grain is plentiful. The people are eating. It looks idyllic, but reality is something different. You are looking at an existence, which is true of many people to this day, where during your life, at some point, you're going to be hungry, you're going to be malnourished, and you're going to suffer. And one of the biggest fears of medieval people was one word: hunger. And when you think about climate change, please think about this reality, which affects people in the Andes, American Indians in the Southwest, people in Africa, people in Asia. It's something we choose very often not to think about. The life expectancy of a medieval peasant, and they planted the seed by scattering it and hoeing it into the ground with a horse. This is the finest reconstruction of medieval agriculture I've ever seen. Life expectancy was under 30 for most people, and this picture of a woman in her 20s gives you a good idea of the reality. Then there were other things which affected in history. I talked about subsistence agriculture, and from the expressions on your faces, I think I've made you think. There's the medieval warm period, a famous period in European history and world history, which has been exaggerated somewhat, which was a period of warmer temperatures, better rainfall, and less ice in the north. And this medieval warm period, which has been hyped because climate deniers say, oh, we've been this warm before, in fact was caused by a very minute adjustment of the Earth's alignment. But what it did, and the most dramatic thing it did for Europeans, was of course the Norse voyages. The voyages that took people from the homeland to the Faroes, the Shetlands, to Britain, to Ireland, and of course to Greenland, and then down into Labrador and Newfoundland. This was possible because the pack ice was far further north. And even then, it was not easy. The picture on the left you should forget. That is Kirk Douglas in a ghastly movie called The Vikings. How many of you have seen it? Oh, you're nice and literate there. I would strongly suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that you get this video, see it, and politely vomit or get drunk. It is full of a bare-chested Kirk Douglas in his prime. And orgies and battles and Viking funerals, the whole bit. It is a picture of a warlike, rapacious culture, which is partly true. But what it does not tell you about is the Norse as seaman and merchant. This is a reconstruction based on a wreck found in Denmark of a canal, which is the Viking or Norse load carrier. They carried cattle in that, they carried family goods, and they carried colonists. They colonized Ireland by 835. They colonized Greenland. They were absolutely superb seamen. And in a way, like the subsistence agriculture, I want to kind of give you the reality of this. This is the south coast of Iceland. On a day when it's blowing from the southwest at about 25 to 30 knots, which is quite powerful wind. Think today. And we were in, I hate to say this, an 800-foot cruise ship. I was lecturing on a cruise ship, which is one of those gigs that you get you to see places you don't otherwise see. But I was sitting up in the forward lounge, having coffee, looking out at the ocean. And I remembered North Sea fishermen who sailed from the North Sea in 60-foot open boats to fish off Iceland for cod in February. And they stayed out there till their holds were filled. Then they sailed back to the North Sea. The casualty rate has been estimated at 60%. But the cod was so valuable in a society where cod or fish were eaten on Fridays that it kept going. But also, I thought of the Norse. Imagine being out in conditions in the open sea with a wind of 30 knots, big seas, bitterly cold, in an open Viking ship. They are superb ships because they're flexible and they bend with the weather. But I thought about that and I realized just how tough they were. And the achievements of people during the medieval war and other periods really have been truly remarkable. But in recent years, we've looked much more further than the epic journeys of the Norse. In Western North America, for example, there is the Great Basin, which is a famous, very arid environment indeed, which got very sparse rainfall. But they found tree rings in the highlands, which show that from 910 to before 1100, and from 1210 to 1340, there were two long drought cycles, intense drought cycles, during the medieval war. So it wasn't necessarily all warm, it was warm and dry or warm and wet. And here there was a beautiful example of adaptation. What did the people do? Very sparse population of hunters and foragers who were constantly on the move. They adapted by anchoring themselves to permanent sources of water and reducing their mobility. A lot of people must have died, but it worked, and they survived, and indeed thrived through drought. The lesson is that, of course, if you're a small-scale society, your vulnerability to climate change is much, much less than it is for a crowded city. Let's look at another example. Now we're going way back. I don't feel any promiscuous devotion to keeping to a chronological sequence here. It's far more fun to hop around. She smiled. You made my day. Thank you. Anyway, the North Sea. What is not commonly known, although I'm sure many of you know it, is that 15,000 years ago, global sea levels were 300 feet lower than today. And the result was that the North Sea, or most of it, was dry land. Britain was part of the continent. Oh dear. Ireland was connected in parts to England. And then it flooded. After 15,000, with the great global warming at the end of the Ice Age, the North Sea was flooding. And back in 1935, 83 years ago, a fisherman on the Dogger banks in the middle of the North Sea dredged up a lump of peat from which fell this object, a bone harpoon or spear point, identical to those found on the shores of the Baltic Sea, dating to about 7000 BC. This caused a major sensation because suddenly it occurred to people that the North Sea, and they knew it was fairly recent, had supported human populations. And in recent years, there has been a major advance in our knowledge of these people, particularly from systematic investigations off the Netherlands, where we now know something about these people and the environment. In the middle is the Doggerland. Those were the last part of the North Sea to flood, around 5500 BC, maybe a little later. They were low hills. The Norwegian trench was much narrower. There were estuaries that flowed here, and of course, major changes to the Rhine and the Thames. And then it slowly flooded. But this was a very horizontal environment. We know that much. It was an environment of lakes, estuaries, and wetlands. And it was an absolute paradise for people who lived off birds and fish and game. And we believe that the total population of the North Sea may have been as many as 10,000 people. That's a guess. Ireland, you can see here a map of 15,000 years ago. Look at the little line at the bottom. When was the earliest? Ireland was set up, I think, about 8,000 BC, wasn't it? Somewhere there? My God, I'm right. We're getting somewhere. But this is a National Geographic reconstruction of what this must have been like. Because if you have, and this is an important point for today, you have a horizontal environment, and the water rises, say, 9 inches, the amount of land you're going to lose is going to be far more than a beach because it floods shallows. And these people lived in an environment so dynamic that if you had a bay where you kept your canoes, and these people lived on the water and among the reeds and ponds. You might die when you were 20, 25, and your bay was gone. The whole landscape had changed. Very dynamic. And it's the sort of short-term change which is so important when you adapt. Because, again, the great thing for these people was A, there was space, B, there were not many of them, and C, they were brilliantly adapted to an environment which abounded in wildlife of all kinds, and they spent most of their lives afloat. The solution was to move, and they simply moved. And when the North Sea finally flooded, they moved onto higher ground. So the North Sea is a classic example of the flexibility of early populations. Now I'm really going to jump forward. Take the example of the Netherlands. And a lot of tonight is going to be about sea levels, because those are one of the more immediate things. On that map, in purple, are the areas of the Netherlands today which are below sea level. And look how much of the country is only a meter above sea level. It's like Bangladesh, which is the same. And you have a fascinating question. And this question is very relevant to us now. And it's very interesting because the history of attempting to control sea levels in the Netherlands goes back at least 1,000 years. And what you're thinking about are options. Do you yield to the ocean? Do you build defenses? Or what? The Dutch have traditionally chosen to wall themselves off from the North Sea. For example, Bronze and Iron Age people built mounds among salt marshes called turbans. You can see a reconstruction here. But the North Sea, and I weigh my words, is one of the most vicious, nasty oceans you can imagine. I am, or was, a yachtsman. I have sailed there. My stomach is still recovering. It really is brutal, because the weather is very quick changing, and shallow water you get very steep seas. And when you get major southwesterly gales, which coincide with a high tide, you get sea surges. Now these sea surges, if you cannot forecast them, and some of them are aftermath of hurricanes in the western Atlantic, you're in trouble. And the most famous one of these, which really prompted a great deal of Dutch sea defense work, was the Great Gaeltacht in 1362. This is called, it means the great killing of people. Ships were wrecked or cast ashore. Villages were completely flooded. You can see here churches. People were rescued in boats. No one knows how many people died because there wasn't much warning, but it was certainly in the tens of thousands. And then when you talk about wildlife and cattle, the losses were enormous. This was remembered for centuries. And the greatest dread of the Dutch is another sea surge that week. And all their efforts at sea defences since then have been protections against 100-year and 200-year events. For example, we had a famous hurricane called Hurricane Katrina in the United States, and the Dutch watched what happened in New Orleans under a microscope and immediately responded to it. They built higher dikes. They realized their dikes were inadequate for long-term protection. The cost socially and financially is colossal. But so far, although it's changing, the Dutch have paid the price. And the result is a strange country in some ways. On the top left is a dike. On the bottom right is a floating neighborhood in Rotterdam. And one way they're adapting is by yielding to the ocean and building floating houses. And there you can see some of the conventional sea defences, which using cement blocks are much more durable than the blocks used before. They even use sand, they use seaweed, everything. And there is one of the barriers which allows wildlife to go into the sloughs further inland, and indeed boats. And there's an inscription on this most famous of them. It was a huge project which did all these, which ended in the 80s and 90s. And the inscription says, "Here the tide is ruled by the wind, by the moon, and us." I'm sorry, I don't believe it. Why? Because this form of adaptation has huge social costs. Is it too expensive? And in this complex day of great sensitivity to environmental change, is probably in the long term unsustainable. The only people who really like this are the sheep, because they look how fat that sheep is. But they live in villages close by, you can't see the ocean. So it's a strange existence, but it is one of the extremes. But throughout the past, there have been constant adaptations to small changes. But where these are most vivid are on Pacific Islands and the Maldives. This is the capital of the Maldives, Mai, which was being walled round by a wall paid for by the Japanese at huge costs. But the sea level is still rising. And there is now a real question as to whether in the long term the Maldives are going to survive. They are a famous seaside resort, for example. Will they survive? To be perfectly blunt, probably not. Why? They don't have the resources, and the world as a whole is not paid to put the money in there. But who knows? Now, another classic example is Alaska. This is a shot I took up at Shishmaref, which is an Inuit village up on the Arctic Ocean. And this place is threatened by winter storms, by erosion from waves, you can see it here, and by sea level rise. And this house has collapsed. And this community will not exist within a generation. So what are the people doing? And they have deep, deep spiritual ties to the land, like they did with the Wembley Tonga. What are they going to do? There's only one answer. They have to move to higher ground. The cost is astronomical. So far, the government has paid, and they are moving most of the village, but now they've come across the unmentionable president and his government who cut off funding. So it's a difficult situation, because this, ladies and gentlemen, is climatic reality. In a world that is far more crowded, far more contentious, far more urbanized, and far more vulnerable than it's ever been before. And if there was one lesson we learn from archaeology and the study of ancient climate, is just how vulnerable we are. Contemplate, for example, ancient Cairo. Population, 30,000 maybe. Here's modern day New Orleans, with the Mississippi seen there, and a ship floating through a channel in the Mississippi which is raised above the level of the city. Hurricane Katrina came through here, flooded most of the flood control works, damaged the water supply, and the sea surge flooded this entire delta you see on the right and made major changes. They're still recovering. But it's interesting because the most important weapon for adaptation here is something that goes back to villages like the Wembley Tonga. One reason the Wembley Tonga survived is because the villages have close ties of connection with one another. And the principle is that if you have extra rain, you give it to your neighbors who don't. The most powerful catalyst for recovery in Katrina's situation is churches, neighborhoods, and family. It is not the government. So in many ways we haven't changed. But what is frightening is that today's adaptation is much, much harder. Can you move a 5 million person city? Too complex. Can't do it. Do we have the political will to make the changes? No, we live from one election to the next. What worries me about this, and the lesson I learned from a lot of this, it isn't you and me, it's our children's children who will have the problem. Just look at this rising sea level. This is an estimate of sea level rise over the next couple of centuries or more in Britain and Ireland. It speaks for itself. We are going to have to make major adaptations to rising sea levels, whether we like it or not. Which is why I think Ireland is an enormously important laboratory for studying ancient climate change. Because, as one writer has said, it's a sentry post for climate and weather. Because you live right on the edge of the Atlantic, and because climatic fluctuations are a central part of Irish history and heritage. Far more than people have realized until recently. Look, for example, at Cooney, Lough, Sligo, and the passage graves. They are the passage graves. They've taken pollen and geochemical analyses from small lake deposits which date from between 7900 to 790 BC. That's a long period. They have these minute cores, and they dissect them. And they can tell you the fluctuations of temperatures. For example, there were two coolings for 2 centuries around 6000 BC. And remember that when you have cooling, your crops get affected. The growing season. Second, forest clearance by early farmers indicated by not only changes in the vegetation, but the presence of cultivation weeds. From 3700 to 3340 BC indicates a period when it was probably pretty good. Populations rose, and it was a time that there was great emphasis on communal burials. Why communal burials? because you like to be buried with your kin. Personally, I'm going to be cremated and scattered, but I don't want an archaeologist digging me up. But if you, those days, it was enormously important. And it's very, very interesting that after 3000 BC, passage graves went out of use. It got cooler and wetter. And there was a break in farming, but probably an increase in cattle. These are the sort of constant adaptations we're trying to study. Is this hard? Yes. It's incredibly local. But until we do this on a lot of sites and put together the bigger picture, we won't really understand just how important climate change is. This is an exemplary piece of work. And you can see the identification of the agriculture farming after 2100 BC when it was slightly warmer. So these things are important. Early modern climate is a fascinating study. Much of the early modern period, which was turbulent everywhere, coincided with the Little Ice Age, which I already mentioned, from about 1350 to 1850. Numerous very cold years. But don't think of a constant ice age. Think of constant changes. Warm years, cold years, warm years. I just read a forecast this morning which said that Ireland's going to have quite a lot of snow this year. Good luck. I wish we could. And I should mention that the rain I've seen this week is the first rain I've seen since April. So I like rain. Anyway, this was a period of all sorts of strange things. One was an unusually high incidence of volcanic eruptions, like the one you see here. Now, you think that's not a meteorological phenomenon. No, it's not. But the consequences of it are, the ash goes up into the atmosphere, it blocks sunlight, and you get instances like the famous summer of 1816, when there was widespread famine in Europe because there were no crops, because it was so cold that the planting season was a joke. And that was the year when Lord Byron and Mary Shelley, who were having an affair, went on holiday to the Swiss lakes, and she wrote Frankenstein. And if you haven't read Frankenstein, you should. It's immortal. It's a symbol of the Little Ice Age. Am I boring you? No. Good. I just want to check. The golden rule of lecturing is never let the audience go to sleep. You've been very good. Here is a somewhat outdated, actually, idea of what the climate was like in the last 2,000 years. Notice, of course, the peak up here. This was done in about 2013. And the real warming started in about 1860 with the increase of industrial pollution. One of the ways they've measured this is by studying the work of artists who painted the Thames and other rivers and look at the very polluted skies that are shown. Then you've got the Little Ice Age, the peak of which was probably in the 17th century, which you'll see in a moment. Then there was the medieval warm up here, but look at all those fluctuations. It's never completely still. For example, the Roman Empire flourished because food was abundant because of warm, good summers. Then it fell apart, partly because of failed crops and partly also because of plague. The impacts on Ireland are still being studied. It's early days. But oak rings, for example, show notable droughts between 1650 and 1654. There was widespread famine and starvation in historical records, a trend to more killings and murders, and major challenges faced both new settlers and dispossessed Irish. It was a very, very rough period. And that, of course, paled into insignificance the later ones. The Great Frost from 1739 to 1741 was triggered probably by a lack of sunspot activity. The famous Manda Millennium minimum, named after an astronomer who identified it, and this brought to Europe, northern Europe, Arctic temperatures and strong cold winds. widespread famine resulting from the failure of potato and oat crops, both of them. And then there was the year of slaughter, where as many as 480,000 people died out of 2.4 million. One kind of paint us over the losses. If you look at the monsoon famines in northern China in 1877, 1.5 million people died as a result of monsoon failure and starvation. In India, the figure was about the same. At the time, the British Raj were exporting grain from India to keep world prices level. The point about all this is that we're living in a warming world. Let's forget the garbage about whether it's called by humans or not. That's obvious. But what, for us, is the reality, is that we live in a warming world. We live in a warming world with much greater vulnerability, where you've got millions of people living at or below sea level, where you've got already hunger and poverty, where you've got enormous potential for political unrest, which you're going to see in Egypt, because the Nile Delta is not feeding as many people as it could, and rising sea levels are destroying not only agricultural land, but groundwater is being polluted. And you've got people moving to avoid climate change. And many of the debates today about migration and immigrants are dealing with a reality. And this reality isn't that those people want to leave their land because they're devoted to it. It's because of environmental change, drought, rainfall, and also extreme flooding. And today we occasionally get a taste of the flooding. The famous floods, Cork floods of 2009. And here on the map you can see England and Wales, the striped parts and the red parts are the vulnerable ones. And extreme weather events like Hurricane Katrina. This was a very severe hurricane, as indeed was the hurricane of about a month ago. If you've been in hurricane force winds, you never forget it, and you never take it lightly after that. It's like brush fires in California. But the damage is extraordinary, and the cost is enormous. Superstorm Sandy in New York State was another one. The person driving that car is a bloody fool, because there's a storm surge going on. And what happened? There's the devastation. Many of these houses were owned by people who have nowhere to go. Their insurance is grossly inadequate. Many of them do not have kin or family they can rely on, and the government gives loans, but the bureaucracy takes months. And for example, with Hurricane Katrina, tens of thousands of people simply left New Orleans forever. So the social impacts of all this are something we've barely begun to really think about. And my only advice to you, when I speak from first-hand experience, having had my house burned down in a bush fire, is be really well insured if you have a house. It costs a little more, but boy, will you sleep better at night. Don't marry a man or a woman who doesn't like good insurance. My only piece of human nature information. Just give you some figures. I know I'm very modern, but I think it's important to understand why ancient climate change is important. This is vulnerability in California. There were 370,000 people at risk in the San Francisco Bay Area alone, there it is, where a lot of the land has been reclaimed and is now reflooding. 160,000 homes around San Francisco are at risk in an era when there is a shortage of housing, especially affordable housing. 526,000 acres of land are at risk, forgive me using the old-fashioned metric, non-metric. And there were 8 towns and cities with over half the population at risk, and there are the towns. You see, what you're dealing with is not only urban sport, but this. Look at those beach houses. Imagine a tsunami or a hurricane with a sea surge coming ashore. Nothing will be left. The social impact will be enormous. So the question one asks, and it's a question that's been asked from very early times, is what do we do? Do we fence ourselves off? Probably too expensive. And in the era where ideologies are saying that governments are too big and expensive, it's a problem. If you look at New York, for example, there is a proposal there to big seawalls. 20 different government agencies would have to be involved in any decision. That sounds absolutely marvelous, doesn't it? Another alternative, and that is really, in fact, the only other alternative is to yield to the ocean. Now, this is a remarkable experiment which took place in May in southeast England, where there was, you can see it there, low-lying land and rising sea levels was flooding this every winter. So what they did was devise a system which permitted the water to rise and flood the area, and they moved people out so that you got an ecologically sustainable landscape where the risk was less. And this has been remarkably successful. So what's this talk been about? It's been about adaptation, vulnerability, the fact that we live in a world that's extraordinarily vulnerable, and please, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget what I said about subsistence. It's so important. And it's in a world where, of all things, if ever there was a time when we have to rely on our neighbours, it is now. And one of the nice things about Ireland is that you take him seriously. So, I worry about my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. What can we do? Almost no long-term planning has been done, except for the Dutch. It is a bit here. Almost no politician will talk about it because they're terrified of the climate deniers and they want to get re-elected. And we live in a world where long-term sustainability is what we need. Is it happening? I just hope it does. I get so tired of doomsday sayers. The end is nigh. That is horse manure. We're Homo sapiens. We're the wise people. We're going to suffer. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to negotiate. But in the long run, we will survive. I've got a blocked thing here. I need one more slide. Now, at this point, probably you're wanting to go to sleep. Let me introduce you to Atticus Catticus Catamormus. He's a Maine Coon cat. He is very imperial. But I worry about his survival. Because the one thing about all of us is that as far as climate is concerned, accept them as a disaster, and the press love disaster. We don't take it seriously. And if there's a lesson from the past, but people have adapted cleverly, it is that we should take it seriously. Please tell your children and your grandchildren, when you have them, how important this is. I hope this has been interesting. I haven't seen anyone go to sleep, so we're doing okay. Thank you very much.